It's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this moment and to the other activities which we hope will flow from the publication of this book that we're here to celebrate. It is with recurring and increasing pride that I watch the work of the David M. Kennedy Center and what that means on the BYU campus specifically, but I think also in an increasing way what it means to the LDS Church. In the very early days of our administrative time together, I wrestled, and a lot of others were wrestling with where was the university and where could it go, and maybe more importantly, where should it go. And it seemed to us, it certainly seemed to me, very early, that if we were to play to our natural strengths at BYU, it was impossible. It would be foolhardy to miss the unique international and cross-cultural experience represented and pursued on this campus, I think unlike almost, probably literally like no other campus on the face of the planet. Young men and young women, faculty members, staff members, going out, having gone out, about to go out into an international world, an international church, to enjoy the kind of specialized and detailed cross-cultural experience that would not be available even to Fulbright scholars or even to weekend visitors or to semester abroad students, but with that unique church mission experience, to simply name the most obvious opportunity that we would have, that BYU had strengths and possibilities, promises in this area that I thought were unequaled anywhere else, and that we simply had to do the very best job we knew how to do in pursuing that. To that proposal, and with the blessing of the trustees, Brother David Kennedy was willing to give his name, and we're delighted to be able to honor him then and now and in the future for what he personally represents in that kind of outreach from the LDS Church, and now with his name on this center, with that kind of outreach from Brigham Young University. And so David and Lenore and your family, we're delighted to again have you with us on campus. We're pleased that you would be with us for this hour and any other moments you can give us in the days and weeks ahead, and to celebrate this marvelous book by Martin, whom we also applaud and celebrate and acknowledge for the first-rate scholarship and the deep friendship and the remarkable collegiality that Martin has always brought to any assignment, and certainly has brought to this one. He has not been without his health problems. I won't allude to Brother Kennedy's health problems this morning. I'll leave that to him. But Martin has not been without his own through this period, and our prayers have been answered in his behalf. And Martin, we're as happy to have you with us as we are to have the book. So, and that's high praise, by the way. So it's high praise at a university. So our congratulations to David and Lenore Kennedy, and to the Kennedy family, and to the Kennedy Center for publishing this book with Deseret Book, and we'll hear from Ron Millett in just a moment, and to feature the great good work of this man and what that can represent for what we're trying to do at BYU. When David took his place in the cabinet as Secretary of the Treasury, he stood, if you understand political protocol and seniority in the cabinet, he stood second only to the Secretary of State in terms of political influence and political priority in times of crisis or need or any other call upon seniority. And no other native of Utah, and so far as we know, no other member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, has ever held a higher position in the United States government. That is a signal honor to him, and it's a signal honor to us as we continue to enjoy the blessings of his name here. The question of how this Mormon farm boy, straight second generation out of Kilmarnock, Scotland, born in a place called Randolph, Utah, how did this young man reach that kind of position of influence then and now? Many things have happened since those days in the cabinet. That is the story that Martin Hickman has been able to tell. We applaud the writer, and we applaud the man and the woman who lived that life, and it is my distinct privilege to welcome them and all of you to campus as we celebrate this, and we express love in doing so, David, and are delighted to have the monumental milestone, we think, come into our lives and yours that this book represents. Thank you.
It is a distinct honor and pleasure to be here today and just to share a few moments with you on behalf of Deseret Book Company, the publisher of this biography of David Kennedy. We appreciate the opportunity at Deseret Book to occasionally have the opportunity to publish a book that has the opportunity and potential to truly change the lives of those readers who will pick the book up and to read it. Eleanor Knowles, who is the editor of this book, is not able to be with us. She's away on assignment. We're publishing another major biography, and we term this biography to be a major biography. She's away on assignment. We'll be publishing and releasing later this month a biography of President Benson, and she's at the press making the final check on that. So we excuse her, but acknowledge her efforts as she worked on this publication. I'd like to acknowledge and thank my wife, who is here with me. A week ago we had the opportunity to be with Brother Kennedy in an informal reception at the church office building, and I heard him make reference to how many years that he and Lenore had been married, and then how many years they had calculated lived together because of the absences and due to travel and assignment. And although my schedule and life is certainly not like his, it's good to have an opportunity for my wife to join me. We were introduced at a gathering some time ago as Mr. and Mrs. Deseret Book, and I don't know if she feels that way or not, but glad to have her here. We appreciate the opportunity that we have had to work with Martin Hickman and Spencer Palmer, principally as we have worked on this publication. And they are truly professional. They have handled this whole project in a very professional way. It has been truly, as in the title page we read, that among other things, that this book has been published by Deseret Book Company in cooperation with the David M. Kennedy Center for International Studies, and it truly has been a project of joint cooperation, and so we express that to you and to Spencer and Martin and Ray, and this has been a delightful experience for us. We have the opportunity at Deseret Book to review excuse me, approximately 600 manuscripts a year, and we publish anywhere from 45 to 50. And as we sort through all of the manuscripts that come into us for various reasons, there are always those few each year that find it very easy to become favorites, and I can honestly tell you that this biography of David Kennedy has been one of my favorites right from the very beginning, in reading it in the early manuscript stage. So we're pleased to be part of this. Edmund Burke said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And I think for those of you who will read this book, you will be able to see and understand that in David M. Kennedy, there truly is a good man who has always been at work doing something for good, not only for his family, for his career, for his country, and for the church. Martin Hickman will tell us more about this book, and and Brother Kennedy's life. I don't intend to take his time, but would just like to conclude with this quote from Andrew Carnegie, who said, "As I grow older, I pay less to what men say. I just watch what they do." And I would say that Those of you who have taken the opportunity to read this book, and those of you who will in the future, and read what Brother Kennedy has done, you will find that your life will be better and improved for the example that he has set for all of us. Again, I thank you on behalf of Deseret Book for being here, and again express appreciation to David Kennedy and his family and to the Kennedy Center here for the opportunity to work together on this publication. Thank you.
Occasionally dreams are realized. Many have dreamed and worked to make the David M. Kennedy Center for International Studies what it is today. But the two events we celebrate today were dreamed and described and pursued most vigorously by Spencer Palmer. And so I know that he experiences today unusual happiness at the fulfillment of important dreams. It is a pleasure for me to be here with you today to celebrate a man and a book. One doesn't often have that opportunity. When William James observed, "The greatest use of a life is to spend it on something that outlasts it," he may have been thinking of something like this splendid biography which Martin Hickman has written about David M. Kennedy. I don't believe anyone else could have given the book such a remarkable writing. The complex and difficult national and international events against which this life was lived have been explained coherently and simply. Professor Hickman has given to his writing the understanding of a lifetime of study. The reader is enriched over and over again by his ability to tell us what was going on in the world as David Kennedy was working through the challenges of his life in banking and government. It is a remarkable achievement since the events and accomplishments were so intertwined. His writing is both complementary and restrained, and where differences in business or government policy emerged, they are recorded fairly. When Albert Einstein remarked, "Only a life lived for others is a life worthwhile," it is men like David M. Kennedy that must have prompted his observation. We do not commonly characterize bankers as men who live for others. But in reading this biography, we cannot ignore the fact that developments in international banking sometimes have great and good impact on developing nations. We also cannot escape or better understand of how choices, a better understanding of how choices in economic policy on the national level have enormous influence upon the lives of millions of individuals. Another dimension of the discussions in this book gives us understanding that one life lived with integrity has opened the door of understanding to others in both our nation and the world. First, David Kennedy was ambassador at large for the nation, dealing with economic issues. Most recently, he has opened the door for the teaching of the gospel, making it possible for us to pursue the commandment to take the gospel to all the world. The core of our teaching here at BYU is to give our students an understanding of the doctrines of the Restoration. Fundamental in these doctrines is the literal family relationship between God and his children. This means that all men and women are brothers and sisters. The bond of brotherhood in the world is not allegorical or representational. The concept of brotherhood is an idea that by virtue of divine revelation is the most significant guiding principle for the governing of our relationships with people everywhere. When the Kennedy Center was established, President Holland outlined 4 major points in his mission statement. I think it's fitting to review them now. 1, to prepare students for responsible citizenship and constructive careers. 2, to develop a quality program of research and scholarly monographs and publications. 3, to serve and to teach the fundamental importance of service. And 4, to build on the university's natural strengths to make international programs one of BYU's pinnacle of excellence. It is with deepest gratitude that we at the university applaud the life of David M. Kennedy. It is good to know that our students may look to the works of this man and see that the fundamental integrity which he has displayed and his daily response to the principles of the Restoration are really the deciding factors in his many varied contributions, especially the ones of greatest trust which are coming to him toward the end of his career. It is our daily prayer that we can give to our students the vision of eternal values which shape character, so that when they go forth, they may find their way to a lifetime of service in the cause of humanity. Perhaps the greatest contribution of the book comes in that it makes clear to us, through the ability of the author, that the impact of the restored gospel has determined the way this man has lived his life. And it shows us how his loyalty to eternal principles has made it possible for him to significantly influence the course of the world. I conclude these remarks with the last paragraph of the book. Quote, "He may at times remember wistfully," Martin writes, "his plans for the cottage in Huntsville, but he also remembers that the call to serve the church came from a prophet of God, and that long ago in the fields of Randolph his father answered his question about the purpose of life simply and succinctly. I'll tell you what the purpose of life is. It's very simple. Then you don't have to worry about it. You think about it, and that'll be it. Your purpose in life is to serve God and your fellow men. Period. That's it. That's all you have to remember." Kennedy has never forgotten, and now past 80, that fatherly counsel still guides his life. End quote. Through this center and through Brigham Young University, we hope to put that compass inside our students so that they may go forth to love and serve our Father's children everywhere. The course will not be fully chartered for each life, but the homing device will give them constant readings on eternal values, and hopefully the result will be productive, full lives, like the two extraordinary men have lived, whose lives and works we celebrate today.
I'm humbled by this occasion, by the insights that Vice President Balloff has given us, and to have Brother Kennedy here well and with his dear wife. David Matthew Kennedy, Banker, Statesman, Churchman, by Martin Berkeley Hickman, is a landmark biographical study. In my opinion, the most important book for LDS readers since the appearance of Ed and Andrew Kimball's Spencer W. Kimball, put out by Bookcraft in 1977. This Kennedy profile deals with the relentless efforts of the distinguished church ambassador in the world at large, how the doors were opened in places like Poland and Portugal. It also offers explanations of what has made this great man tick and what the momentum of his groundwork in the church may mean in years ahead in terms of dilemmas which this church must face in the international field. But this Kennedy biography is also of instant and important interest beyond the circles of this church. This man's life and works, as you know, are of national and international importance in fields of diplomacy, banking, and statesmanship. And I'm particularly impressed with the Hickman analysis of crucial national and international issues and of personalities that have played leading roles in the Nixon years in the national administration and during Kennedy's tenure as Secretary of the Treasury, afterward when he was Ambassador at Large for the United States. I have studied, and I think other people, leaders of the nations, businessmen and bankers, politicians will find much in this book to give them thought and to give them concern on decisions and policies of the United States. As I pursue, and have pursued more than once, the pages of this splendid book, I asked myself what has made Martin Hickman, the author, so successful. And I this morning randomly put down some of the following comments in answer to that question. One, I'm impressed with his enthusiasm for the man he is studying. He He believes in Kennedy. He admires Kennedy. This is an adventure in affection and respect, and one sees that throughout the book. 2, he is committed and inspired by the unfolding of the kingdom of God in the world and of the Lord's hand in dealing with David Kennedy. 3, Martin Hickman is a thorough and meticulous research scholar. He interviewed everybody that had ever known David Kennedy and interviewed Brother Kennedy himself on numerous occasions. Anyone that has had any slightest connection with the man and his career, both Mormon and non-Mormon alike. He has collected memorabilia and data from letters and resources in libraries at every hand, and has carefully checked out with thoroughness his information. 4, he has brought a lifetime of skill and study in politics and international relations and history and so on to his study. Martin Hickman is one of the, and Ray Hillam has told me this many times, Martin Hickman is one of the best read scholars at Brigham Young University today. And he can deal with alacrity with issues that some of the rest of us didn't even know existed because of his reading and his understanding of history in Europe, in the United States, and in the modern world. 5, he has himself had rich personal professional experience, not only serving as 17 years as the Dean of the College of Social Sciences, Family, Home, and Social Sciences now on this campus, but directly related in many creative scholarly projects with his faculty and with students. Was a professor of political science at the University of Southern California for 6 years, spent 7 years in the U.S. Foreign Service, including service in Asia and Hong Kong. He knew what to look for when dealing with diplomacy and with dealing with the Department of State and with dealing with international issues. He understood some of the elements that were at play even before he focused in on the Kennedy work and the Foreign Service and international problems and issues that Kennedy himself had to face. 6, I think this book is well conceived, well organized, includes kind of a judicious harmony or a judicious combination of the personal, in a case or two the anecdotal on the one hand, as well as the professional, the public and national issues that are at hand faced by the author. In dealing squarely with these issues and with ideas, he's able to clarify what turns out to be complicated and sometimes difficult and specialized problems. Martin Hickman's analysis is often brilliant and always something that, for those of us that are not fully familiar, are grateful for the lucidity and the simplicity with which he clarifies some of these issues. Finally, I think this book was written during one of the most traumatic periods of Martin Hickman's life, and that's been alluded to. I was with Ray and my son James when Brother Hickman had his heart attack in the special room of the hospital where such things take place. The trauma that came from that, the preservation of his life, I think that did something to Martin Hickman and his family and aided in some of the more poignant insights and sensitivities that one sees in this book. There is poetry in the book as well as professorship. I'm thoroughly amazed at the beauty, sometimes the graciousness and literary quality of some of the personal parts of the book, particularly as it deals with Lenora and her sweetheart and husband, David. And I think that Martin proved himself as an author and a writer, as well as an administrator and a scholar. He was given the assignment to write this book in 1983. His heart attack came in 1984, and somehow he was able to start right in again and face the problems at hand. And I have found something to admire and celebrate in what has happened to Martin Hickman as he has tried to fully perceive the sensitivities and accomplishments of David M. Kennedy. I think we're here now to hear from the author. The title of his lecture, Biography, The Quest for Events and Characters. I'm very honored and pleased to introduce Martin Berkeley Hickman, the author of a book that I say is well conceived, well researched, well written, and a landmark study. Dr. Hickman.
After all of that, Brother Kennedy, I'm tempted to ask the question that J. Golden Kimball asked. Who in the hell's dead around here anyway? When I after my heart attack and I came to consciousness, I accused Ray and Spencer of taking me to the hospital because Spencer wanted to make sure the book got written and Ray wanted to make sure that the travel money was not cut off. Soon after I was asked to write David Kennedy's biography, I began to read essays on the writing of biography, since I was treading on new ground for me. The first essay I consulted asserted that the most fundamental rule is that the subject must be dead. The realization that, fortunately, I must break the first rule released me from a slavish adherence to the other rules that the essay urged upon me. Most of the author's suggestions were helpful, and there was one rule that made especially good sense to me and became the guiding principle of the book. A biography should not be the life and times of the subject, but should be a search for events and character. My determination to follow that advice was reinforced when I learned that Walter Lippmann's biographer had said that there was so much to be said that if Lippmann's name did not appear on the page, then the material probably should not be included. Even though I've tried to focus sharply on David Kennedy in writing his biography, the complexity of his professional life has forced me to include considerable background material in my request for the significant events in his life. What could I say about Kennedy's 16-year career at the Federal Reserve Board without explaining the structure and purpose and the function of the Federal Reserve System? Getting those matters straight was important not only so I could describe what Kennedy was doing while he was at the board, but also to show that his Washington experience enabled him to enter his banking career with a clear understanding of the implications of the Federal Reserve policy for the American banking system. It was those insights that set him apart from his colleagues at the bank and gave him influence not only there, but in the American financial community. The same issue rose at each stage of his professional development. What does it mean to report that he was chairman of Continental Illinois Bank and Trust Company, unless readers know something about commercial banking and the changes that banking was going through in the 1950s and 60s? Nor did I find it possible to make his tenure at the Treasury meaningful without a discussion of the International Monetary Fund, the causes and curses of inflation, the imbalance of American trade with other countries, or the conflicting views on welfare reform. Determined as I was that the search for events and characters would dominate the biography, background material kept creeping in the book by force of necessity. I have tried to provide what seemed the absolutely necessary background without falling between the two proverbial stools of not being precise enough for the experts or being too detailed for other readers. As I began the biography, I had to decide between two procedures. Should I do all of the research before beginning to write, or should I write each chapter as I finished the research of that stage? I decided on the latter process, largely because the process of writing provided simultaneously a creative release and a stimulus for further research. I'm not sure that my way of doing things is the best, but it seemed right for me at the time. My quest for the events that defined David Kennedy's life began with a careful reading of the 3-volume Kennedy oral history conducted by Gordon Irving, the director of the Church Oral History Program. Gordon's here today and tells me that the oral history is not complete, that they're still adding to. Oral histories permit biographers to see the past from the perspective of their subjects. That perspective must surely be the starting point of the understanding of the life of another person. In oral histories are revealed the psychological, emotional, and intellectual values through which the subjects of biographies interpret the events in their lives, as well as of those events in the lives of other people. Those qualities, however, do not mean that oral biography or oral histories are complete and reliable guides for a biographer. Oral histories report events only in a very broad chronological sequence and as remembrances rather than carefully documented descriptions of those events. The biographer must therefore turn to oral histories for the insights they provide, but search beyond them for the evidence that will bring structure and discipline to the biography. Fortunately, in writing the Kennedy biography, I've had access to the voluminous public record that provided an accurate context for the oral history. That public record is contained in the Kennedy papers, now housed in the Kennedy Center, but which will eventually be turned over to the Lee Library. Those papers include a substantial collection of journal articles, newspaper and journal articles about David Kennedy, the reports of the congressional committees containing his testimony before those committees, much of his extensive correspondence with business associates, friends, and family. In the chapter dealing with his mission, the papers contain excerpts from his letters to Lenora that were hardly ever more than 3 days apart. No rule in those days about writing once a week. Thus, I could trace his whereabouts during those 2 years with unerring accuracy. The Kennedy papers also contain a chronology of his activities for almost every day from the time he became president and chairman of Continental until he left government in 1973. In addition to that chronological record are the files dealing with every substantive issue that crossed his desk during those years. Those files range all the way from explaining to shareholders why Continental entered the credit card business, to memoranda to the president on sensitive issues of national security. They vividly created for me a crucial event in Kennedy's life. There is, for example, the attempt of the State Department to prevent him retaining his status as ambassador at large and a member of the cabinet when he was appointed ambassador to NATO. In those files, I could trace the tension that arose over that issue. Kennedy explaining to the president why it was in the best interest of the nation that he remain in the cabinet, the State Department arguing that his request was unprecedented, Kennedy threatening to resign, Alexander Haig counseling patience, and the resolution of the issue in Kennedy's favor. Such moments were fascinating for me not only as Kennedy's biographer, but also because as a former Foreign Service officer, I could fully sense the frustration of the department in having an ambassador who had independent access to the president. No wonder Secretary Rogers protested. Despite the richness of the Kennedy's papers, there were still unanswered questions, and it was necessary to interview a wide range of people who knew Kennedy at every stage of his life, and I see many of you here today. Paul Volcker not only shared with me his perception of the battles they fought together, but asked me if I was going to use David or Kennedy in the text of the book. When I told him that I would use David in chapters dealing with his youth, but Kennedy in the later professional chapters, he expressed his approval. He objected, he said, to the use of the first name because it smacked of an unjustified familiarity. I left thinking Volcker was as right in his literary taste as he was in his international economics. The people who graciously submitted to interviews are too numerous to mention here, but I have recognized their contribution in the bibliographical notes for each chapter. I'd also note that the original typescript is somewhat longer and more fully documented than the printed version because some necessary concessions had to be made to the economics of publishing. Copies of the original typescript are in the Kennedy papers and may be consulted by scholars or others who would like to see a more detailed documentation on specific points. In pursuit of the public record of the significant events that comprise the biography, I have sought to meld the personalized accounts containing in the oral history with the public record so that an accurate record of events, participants, and outcomes are given perspective and meaning by the insights of the oral history. The second part of my task, the search for character, was facilitated by the same voluminous body of data in the Kennedy papers, buttressed by interviews with family, friends, business associates, governments, colleagues in government service, and competitors. I have not tried to psychoanalyze David Kennedy. I have neither the skills nor the inclination to do so. But in the course of writing the biography, I became convinced that one could not understand David Kennedy without taking into consideration the responsibility that was thrust upon him at an early age because of his mother's poor health. That responsibility included not only spending an entire summer in Ogden when he was 11 with his mother while she sought better medical care, that he was the only member of the family with her, but also being responsible for household chores during all of his youth. That experience, I believe, led him to define himself as an adult early in his life and gave his mother a unique opportunity to press upon him the importance of the twin goals of an education and a mission. At the same time, George Kennedy, David's father, whose willingness to pay the price in hard work that precedes success, provided a powerful role model that is mirrored in his son's ability to concentrate single-mindedly on the task at hand. The major thrust of my search for David Kennedy's character was to examine the extent to which his professed values was reflected in his behavior. Fortunately, that task was not difficult. His private life is impeccable, his church service exemplary, and his professional life devoid of ethical transgressions. In making that assessment, I tried not to portray him as a paper saint, for within that larger context, I have sought to be faithful to his very human qualities. He wanted to do well, to make something of his life. In short, he was ambitious, but not obsessed by that ambition. He was impatient with those who were unwilling to work as hard as he thought necessary. Each of his daughters assured me of his sterling qualities as a father, but then reminded me that he had a sharp tongue. His judgment, usually sound, failed him at times in assessment of policies and people, and he was not always sensitive to political nuances. My fundamental problem in assessing David Kennedy's career was that in the search for events and characters, I came to admire his achievement and to like him as a person. I hope I've been able to convey to the reader the vigor and vision of his leadership at Continental. His vigor was reflected in his determination Continental would not be eclipsed in the Midwest by his competitors. That resolution led to the Continental Citibank merger, a dramatic tale of high finance, courtroom battles, and congressional infighting. His vision of Continental as a major international bank led him to establish foreign branches when most of his senior vice presidents thought he was making a mistake. Just as reflective, as dramatic and reflective of David Kennedy at his best was the intricate negotiations he undertook while ambassador at large in the Far East to reduce textile exports to the United States. Beyond those achievements to admire, I found that I was not the only one who liked David Kennedy. Universally, his colleagues at the bank and in governments expressed admiration for his ability to gather around him first-rate people and to give them the authority and responsibility they needed to succeed at their tasks. The friends and acquaintances drawn into the circle of Kennedy admirers reached beyond his colleagues through those who did business with him around the world and to his competitors. Gaylord Freeman, chairman of National City Bank, Continental's principal competitor, said that the only time he was mad at David Kennedy was over the merger with City National, a natural reaction. A central theme of the biography is the role of the church in David Kennedy's personal and family life. He was raised in a believing home, fulfilled at each stage his priesthood duties. He and Lenora were married in the temple, only to have him leave her almost at the altar for a mission to Great Britain. He has been a Sunday school teacher, a priest quorum advisor, a bishop, a counselor in the state presidency, and finally special representative of the First Presidency. There is much one can know about David Kennedy without knowing that he is a Mormon boy. But it's impossible to understand either his professional or private life without taking that membership into account. Indeed, at one time I planned to entitle the biography David Kennedy, A Mormon Life. Despite the change in title, one of my goals remained to examine Kennedy's professional career within the context of his Mormon heritage, including his lifelong allegiance to the doctrine and to the Church's claim to a unique place among all the religions of the world. I've aspired to weave his religious faith into a biography, both as a motivation and a result. This is a book about a believer by a believer. Consequently, I have not adopted a feigned objectivity in an effort to distance myself from Kennedy's religious views and from Kennedy's religious experience. My own identification with those religious views and commitment will be most evident in the chapter on his service as special representative of the First Presidency. In that context, though, I raise questions about where that office should fit in the Church's organization, the extent to which it is an extension of Kennedy's unique qualifications and personality, and whether there is a real and continuing need for it in the future. Yet even in this chapter, I've aspired to integrate Kennedy's commitment to the Church into the biography in such a way that all readers would grasp its importance to a full understanding of his motivations, character, and lifestyle. I've learned much in the process of writing the biography. First, I've learned much about David Kennedy, and I've tried to communicate what I've learned in the book. I know more now about the problems of biographical research than I knew at the beginning. The mysteries of commercial banking and the importance of Federal Reserve policies to the economic health of the nation are clearer to me now than when I started. I hope I've learned more than just economic jargon in attempting to understand international finance, the balance of payments, and inflation. These are all things that I deliberately set to learn. I looked them up, one might say. But in the process of looking them up, I came upon other issues that piqued my curiosity, but for which I have not yet found the answers. Let me raise just one of those issues. Central to any biography is the impact family life has had on the subject. Not just the atomic family, but the extended family and preceding generations. As I have thought about that issue, I have reflected on two very different American families, the Adams and the Lincolns. For more than a century, the Adams, beginning with John Adams, were at the center of American political life. John Adams was the political schoolmaster of the revolutionary generation. He served as president. His son, John Quincy Adams, followed in his father's footsteps. His grandson, Charles Francis Adams, was our ambassador to Great Britain during the Civil War and played a crucial role in convincing the British that they should not recognize the Confederacy. And his great-grandsons, Henry Adams and Brooke Adams, were among the foremost American intellectuals at the beginning of our own century. What forces, what family pressures or encouragement, what environmental factors, what educational opportunity, what native ability produced that succession of individuals I have not explored but only wondered about. I've wondered about the Lincolns in contrast to the Adams. On the face of past family history, there seems nothing that would have induced even the most perceptive observer to predict that the Lincolns would produce America's greatest president. None of the opportunities that graced the lives of four generations of Adams were open to the young Abe Lincoln. There was no family tradition of achievement beyond wrenching a living from the land. No teacher who set the boy's heart on fire for educational excellence. No mentor in his youth who could tutor him in the use of the English language, yet he developed a facility of expression that reached not only the minds of his audiences but also their hearts. I have pondered the differences between those two families as I've traced the life of David Kennedy from his birth and boyhood in Randolph to his nomination and confirmation as Secretary of the Treasury and his calling as Special Representative of the First Presidency. How did it come about that his life was so much different than those of his brothers? Different, not better. Why was the vision of a mission and education that David's mother dreamed for all of her sons realized in only one? I've suggested some answers to those questions in the biography, but in the end there is perhaps no better explanation than the belief President Kimball once expressed that David Kennedy's journey from Randolph to the capitals of the world was but preparation for his service in the kingdom of God. I cannot close today without thanking those who have played an important role in bringing this project to fruition. I could not have mastered the vast body of material relating to Kennedy's life without the help of three excellent research assistants. The first was Greg Johnson, who began the difficult but necessary task of developing a computer-based retrieval system so that the search for the relevant documents could be made efficiently and rapidly. Dale Lyman was particularly helpful in the research on the Treasury years, and special mention must be made of Grant Scavlin, who has checked every footnote, the spelling of every proper name, assured that all corrections were properly entered in the original, and managed all of this in good humor and rare diligence, and who contributed substantially to my reputation with Spencer Palmer for being precise. While mentioning those who have contributed substantially to the volume, I should acknowledge the assistance of Howard Christie, who is here today, Director of Scholarly Publications at BYU, who read the manuscript and made helpful suggestions for improving its content and style. And lastly, as I write in the preface, where I've acknowledged everyone that assisted me. Lastly, most importantly, I'm grateful for the sustaining presence of my wife, Joanne. Not only has she believed in me and in the project, but she has read every word of the book with less concern for my ego than with improving my work. She nursed me through a heart attack that delayed work on the book for 3 months and has fended off demands on my time that would have slowed my progress. There are debts that can never be repaid, but only acknowledged. I am grateful for the chance to acknowledge my debt to her that I cannot repay. But I'm grateful to all of those who have contributed to the completion of the book. It's been a marvelous experience. And Spencer always suggested to me that it was a good thing that came at the end of my career, because then I wouldn't feel the temptation to try to duplicate it. Thank you.
This is a historic day for the David M. Kennedy Center for International Studies. The biography is complete, and it is now in the bookstore. You may be interested to know that the Hickman book has been designated as Volume 1 in our monograph series. One other has been published, and others are in preparation. Also, in the name of scholarship, the Center has funded 42 research proposals and supported 10 David M. Kennedy Research Fellows. So we feel, President Holland, that we are at least endeavoring to carry out your mandate for scholarship. As for this well-crafted biography, I promise you, if you read it, you will come from the experiences I have with a deeper appreciation for the stature and contribution of, quote, the man from Randolph, end quote. David M. Kennedy is an example for those of us in the center, which carries his name. He's an example to our students, some of whom wish to emulate his distinguished international career in banking and government. All of us wish to emulate his career in church service, careers so brilliantly and warmly described in Martin Hickman's biography. Also, Martin B. Hickman is an example of the kind of scholarship that we wish to support and continue to support in the David M. Kennedy Center. He has provided a benchmark contribution in the field of scholarly biography. And today we are complimented by your presence. You, President Holland, and President Baloff, and President Millett, and others, the members of the Kennedy family, we're of course very pleased that Brother Kennedy could visit with us, to be with us today. We're pleased also to see in the audience so many of Martin's friends and colleagues who have been helpful to him. I know he appreciates very much your presence, as we all do. The benediction will be offered by Dean Robert J. Matthews of Religious Education. We wish to invite you after for light refreshments out in the hall. Thank you again for coming.